Dragon's Heart Tower. Level 23. Residence 30. Emma and Thasia's bedroom. The tent. Emma Booker. I couldn't get to sleep. No matter how hard I tossed and turned, no matter how much I twisted this way and that. Not even asking the Eevee for low-fidelity playlists to sleep to had helped my situation any. Wait, the Eevee? I sprung up as I realised I still heard its passive-aggressive replies, as if I still had the suit on. Giving myself a cursory look over, outstretching my gloved hands, it was clear that was exactly the case. I was still wearing the fucking suit. Was I that tired that I'd forgotten to take the suit off before crawling to bed? I let out a large sigh of annoyance as I stood back up, reaching over to my gauntlet-mounted datapad as I began tapping away at the suit's manual release overrides. I'd wasted enough time as it was stuck in this thing. I was going to make sure I could get at least some shut-eye before. Crunch! My fingers stopped moving. My whole body froze as my cameras began picking up movement, the exact same movements I'd logged from the garden just a few hours prior. Instead of it being outside of the tent, however, the movement was logged from inside of it, or more specifically, it was inside of the air recycling ducts. This was impossible. The tent was a closed system. There wasn't any way anything could have entered except the null's core. Did a piece of it get lodged in my suit when it blew up? I barely had any time to even process the logistics of the null being here before it rapidly oozed out of the ventilation duct like a pile of non-Newtonian sludge. It was at that moment between fight and flight that I knew I had to get out of there. Combat within the tent was a no-go, and I needed some space between it and myself, some distance so that I could effectively deal with it. I leapt for the airlock door, reaching over to manually yank it open, only to slam head face first against the hardened plastic floor, as I felt my centre of balance inexplicably failing, my ankle having been lassoed onto by the iron grip of this grey mass or sickly sludge. Things progressed impossibly quickly after that, as I reached for my gun, only to have the thing pull me in, like an amoeba engulfing its poor single-cell victim. Except I was that single cell. Though I sure as hell wasn't intent on becoming a fucking meal, a thought that only became more acute as I was pulled into its cytoplasmic confines, the sickly grey membrane closing probably soon after. So I tugged and pulled, punching against the malleable skin of the blob, only for it to stretch impossibly thin, refusing to break. The situation went from bad to worse, as the jelly-like fluid I was floating in increased in viscosity, to the point where I felt like I was stuck in molasses. Every inch of movement felt like a Herculean task, even when aided by the exoskeleton and servos of the suit, all of which were on the verge of overheating just by sheer strain alone. Then, finally, I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because it was physically impossible to resist. My heart continued to race as my breathing hitched up in frequency, to the point where I felt like I was about to pass out. But I never did. Not even as I felt the thick, viscous molasses entering my suit through unseen seams, before finally coating my whole body from head to toe. I was suspended in this solution for what felt like entire hours, but as the suit would indicate, it had only been barely a few minutes since this whole situation went sideways. However, as the minutes passed, I took note as the null's membrane grew thinner and thinner, until finally it popped, plopping me back on the composite flooring of the tent, completely motionless, as my body refused to respond to any of my commands to book it out of there. I didn't understand what happened next. I couldn't really comprehend it, but I suddenly felt the cold, unregulated air hitting my back, causing me to flinch and struggle as I attempted to leap out of the suit, only to find that I couldn't. Instead, something else did, and it did so slowly, carefully, methodically, as if relishing in the feeling of freedom of movement as I'd done so last night upon exiting the suit in the tent for the very first time. In fact, I caught a glimpse of it as it strode its way in front of me, or rather in front of the armour. As what stood in front of me was myself. It was dressed in the same undersuit that I'd worn when I entered the armour this morning. Its brown hair was ruffled, messy, and unkempt, exactly like mine. It was then that I realised, with a sudden horror and a gut-wrenching sense of absolute terror, that it was me, and I wasn't stuck inside the suit. Thanks, it spoke, in a voice that perfectly mimicked my own, down to that subtle sing-song cadence I'd used to mess with my friends back home, as if this was some sort of a fucking prank. I think this is the start to a solid relationship. Seeing as I am you now, I'm as trapped in this unforgiving world of manner as much as you were, but hey, I have a body now, and you. It looked to me with a cock of its head. Or my head. Fuck. I didn't know what was going on anymore. Well, you're still alive in there, aren't you? I couldn't respond. I couldn't move. I take it you're still in there. Well, listen, be glad I didn't just melt you down or remove your soul or something. I just moved it. And I put it in the next best thing. Your armor. Or, well, I guess I should say it's my armor now. And wait, does this mean you belong to me? Huh, that's kind of weird, but hey, we can make that work, right? It grinned, a playful, almost impish smile that didn't fit my face. Huh, I'll take the silence as a yes. All right then, it's nearly 2300 hours. Oh wow, you Earthrealmers have such a fascinating timekeeping convention. Your mind's filled with all sorts of unique goodies. I can't wait to be you, Emma. Or, I guess I am you now, huh? It continued unabated, staring at me with those ecstatic eyes. The eyes of someone who'd just escaped from Maxsec prison, and was now just relishing in the freedom of fresh air. I tried moving, struggling, trying to pull my arms this way and that, but I couldn't. All I could do was watch, through those lenses that now were my eyes, unable to even blink as the gnarl turned me maintain that cocky grin throughout my internal screaming. It eventually hopped up on a stool, pushing his face, my face up close towards the suit's helmet, as if to rub its victory in my face further. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your mission. No one will suspect a thing. And when we get back to Earth by year's end, I'll make sure to request the Director and the Major to keep this specific set of armor. I won't let you die, Emma Booker. I still care about you after all. It continued on in that sing-song voice before leaping off of that stool with the finesse of a figure dancer. Something I doubt I could have done. Without a moment's hesitation, it got back in the suit, hopping back inside as it began taking full control and began walking out of the tent. It felt like I'd taken a back seat as my body, or rather the suit, began moving under the doppelganger's whims. I could only look on in abject terror as I continued shouting expletives, but without a mouth. No one could hear me scream. Don't worry, buddy. You'll get used to it. Beep, 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 beep. I woke up, dazed, panicked, confused and hot. Sweat covered my hair and face as I scrambled in place for a while, struggling to regain my bearings, still stuck between the world of the dreaming and the world of the waking. It took a while, what felt like minutes, before my hands reached up to touch my face, my arms, my legs, my whole body, as if to reassure myself that all of that was just a nightmare. It was silly, perhaps even stupid to do, but at this point I doubted that any crazy outlandish fear was ever truly out of the question anymore. The line between what was reality and what was fantasy had already well and truly shattered the moment I crossed that portal, and into a realm of literal swords and sorcery. 5 minutes passed, and I still couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling of being trapped inside of the armor. Not as a passenger, not as a wearer, but as a fucking prisoner inside of the metal and composite itself. And just like last night, I sat cross-legged in front of the veritable powerhouse of a machine, staring up at its unfeeling, unflinching face. This time, however, I shuddered. I knew it wasn't possible. I knew the Null wasn't capable of that. It was just my overactive imagination. I never should have fucking binged Castles and Wyvern's hours-long hidden lore breakdowns. It was nightmare fuel back in high school. It's still nightmare fuel now. Fucking hell. I spoke out loud, purely to myself. I just needed to hear my own voice. I just needed the reassurance that everything was in fact okay. I didn't know what particular aspect of Castles and Wyverns I was pulling from, what amorphous creature of despair I was drawing inspiration from, or whether it was just homebrew at this point, but I knew it was all just a result of my overactive imagination. Medical alert. detecting elevated heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, and stress hormones. EEG patterns outside baseline standard. Patterns indicate 1 episode of severe night terror. Emma Booker, do you wish to... Evie, shut up, I'm fine. Just give me a fucking minute, I managed out, causing the Evie to beep in acknowledgement. Acknowledged, Emma Booker. Medical events logged for field assessment reports. I groaned out in exasperation, realizing what this meant when I got home. Therapy. My eyes quickly shot up to the upper right corner of my vision, expecting to see the various countdown timers, and the titular clock that always seemed to be ticking towards something. However, this being one of the few moments I was actually outside of the suit, all I saw was the same stark white of the tent, and a few eye floaties. Evie? Time? It is currently 22:45 hours. Alright, give me 10 minutes, then a 5-minute snooze limit. Acknowledged. Dragon's Heart Tower. Level 23. Residence 30. Living room. Local time, 2300 hours. Emma Booker. Priority number 1 after the weapons inspection, and before tomorrow's second attempt at negotiations with the apprentice, get the rest of the tent's living facilities set up stat, I instructed myself, as I lazily exited my room and back into the dorm's shared living space. There, as expected, I was met with the likes of Thacia and Thalmin. What wasn't expected, however, was the return of a familiar blue-scaled face. A face that looked none too pleased about his current disposition, which was fair, given how he looked as if he just crawled out of a hole. If there was an orchestrator to our fates, it was clear they missed the mark as to who should have borne the brunt of the battle scars of the day. Though to be fair, I'm glad I didn't bear any scars at all, because if the fight did come to that, I shudder to think what might have actually come of it. Really, Earthrealmer? It's rude to gawk and stare, you know. I know that a thatched hut in a damp cave isn't ideal nor conducive to nurturing a society of culture and etiquette, but I would expect that your kind would already be used to seeing attire that's been torn and ripped apart by foul beasts. Eleanor suddenly barked out, which elicited a sharp call of annoyance from the likes of Thacia, and a stone growling at by Thalmin. So, I began, steadying myself, realizing that I was opening the door to Eleanor's petty tirades. But damn it, I couldn't help but to entertain my curiosity. What happened, Eleanor? This went as well as one would expect. As the little thing raised his head up high, aiming his maw at the ceiling and away from everyone, before finally, alert, localized surge of mana radiation detected, 300% above background radiation levels. A small black puff of smoke and soot erupted from the Venerian's maw, followed by a series of sparks and small, briefly lived flame that died as quickly as it had sputtered into existence. If that was an attempt at venting his frustrations in a way similar to his supposed draconic ancestors, then he'd missed the mark, and then some. Eleanor, if you would stop trying to emulate your 30-second cousin twice removed, that would be much appreciated. Thank you, Thalmin interrupted, garnering a sharp hiss from the blue Venerian, who wordlessly glared daggers at the lupinal prince. This prompted him to immediately begin damage control. But you see, I wasn't trying to emulate any of my draconic relatives. That would be a feat reserved to be witnessed by the likes of my fellows, and not the likes of those unworthy of such a splendorous display of draconic excellence. The Venerian attempted to quickly correct his course. Neither a tainted, nor a mercenary, nor a new realmer is deserving of such a brazen act of draconic aggression, he proudly boasted. So why the... Aha! And there we have it, my dear mercenary friend. As presumptuous and quick to assume as always. What you saw wasn't a regal display of draconic power, he postured. Okay. Then what was it? It was my attempt at answering the Earthrealmer's question via a visual demonstration that might more easily be digested by a being that always seems to prefer demonstration over conversation. The small thing attempted to turn his failed attempt at mimicking a dragon's breath around, twisting and twirling his logic in a way that would make any junior politician back at home blush. A visual demonstration of the failure of bartering your way through the library? Thacia interjected, with an exasperated coo. On the contrary, my tainted princess. This is a visual demonstration of a proactive first-year student of the Transgration Academy for the Magical Arts, actually using his time wisely to get a leg up before the races have even commenced. The lizard shot back. For you see, I'm involved in a variety of, shall I say, extracurriculars now, of which you have more than likely seen just a disproportionately small fraction of in that brief instance where we crossed paths in the library. The Venerian, having finished his long-winded humble brag, finally turned back to face everyone. So to answer your question, Earthrealmer, I have been busy with extracurriculars, plain and simple. One of which resulted in a fierce and horribly unjustified altercation at the abominable and shameful establishment that is the library, which inevitably resulted in me expending all of my efforts in utilizing my natural draconic gifts for the express purpose of self-defense. Was he actually being truthful right now? I thought he'd at least try to hide that fact, which means there's probably more to it than just a trip to the library and a simple altercation with the foxes. If he wasn't willing to hide that fact, there was definitely something else afoot. Right, I answered simply, and with a single cautious nod. All right then, thank you for answering my question, Eleanor, I stated plainly, but was swiftly interrupted by Thalmin, who clearly had something more pressing to say. Emma, we need to talk, Thalmin began, snuffing out the embers of the Venerian's fire before it could ignite into anything resembling a longer-form conversation. As it was clear that if Eleanor had his way, this entire night would have inevitably fell into another series of petty verbal spats. And so, with a collective series of nods from the likes of the Lupinor, the Avenor, and myself, we collectively decided to disregard the Venerian's incessant baiting. At least for now. Sure, what's up? I managed out, in between a heavy yawn and a stretch. A stretch which would have ended in some collateral damage in the form of some blunt force damage to the walls and furnishings, if it wasn't for the months-long process of power armor acclimatization, or more specifically the spatial awareness courses that forced me to all but rewire my subconscious perceptions on just how much space I actually took up. So, all of you are going to act like children, completely moving on without a single shred or word of sympathy or empathy? The Venerian spoke up once more. This time he was seething. Fine, be that way. I'll take my leave. The diminutive lizard began storming out of our little group, making an effort to make each and every one of his little stomps as loud and as audible as possible, as he entered his bedroom, and slammed the door behind him shut. We collectively decided to quickly move past that, at least for the time being, as far more pressing matters warranted our attention. Emma, I believe it would be prudent to discuss what it is you decide to tell the armor about your gun. I knew at that point it was bound to be a long conversation. The Transgration Academy for the Magical Arts. Armorer's Workshop. Local time, 23:45 hours. Emma Booker. The conversation ended up as long as I'd assumed. Whilst a lot had been discussed and a lot of ideas had been exchanged, we ended up circling back on ourselves towards a unanimous decision. That it would be best if I kept the gun, at least when it came to its true nature, away from the armourer. Thalmin had already had a chance to meet the guy during the course of my nap, for the purposes of his own weapons inspection. He briefed me as much as he could from what little he was able to discern from the guy, which wasn't much, given how brief the whole interaction was for him. Though brief, there was one thing about the armourer that really struck Thalmin, and that was the fact that he was an eccentric. Though not in a way that seemed harmful, as the wolf mentioned how he seemed more akin to Chiska than Mautori, which was a breath of fresh air. Despite this, there was something worrying about him, and that was his constant focus on poking and prodding every student for gossip on a certain armoured student. That was enough to give me pause for concern. All in all, I was confident in my assessment to lead in with caution rather than boisterous posturing. A decision that I'd carefully weighed up in my head ever since the announcement of the weapons inspection the night prior. Whilst I considered divulging a limited deal of information regarding the gun as a show of force, I realised that any net gain I earned from that would more than likely be outweighed by the Academy managing to use that intel against me. Either by preparing some sort of countermeasure, or just by the loss of the element of surprise. It was safer to stay silent about it. And funnily enough, the whole stereotype of a mannerless weapon being primitive would be useful in this effort, as I could lean into that narrative the Nexus was more than happy to propagate. What I was less confident about, however, was my ability to navigate the maze that was the Academy, as every journey down its halls seemed to be an adventure unto itself. Indeed, the journey was practically littered with what I could only describe as magical potholes, or something with how many warnings of localized surges of mana radiation had been logged between my dorm and the workshop. Thankfully, though, the path to the workshop proper was anything if not a welcome break from the usual academy fare, as all it was just a long, insultingly straight corridor that led from the castle proper towards another structure built a good ways away from the main complex. The long skinny corridor reminded me of those ridiculous walkways you'd find at the old airports, converted to spaceports, then reconverted to airports once again that dotted the entirety of Aquilia. From the ancient Newark and LaGuardia to the mid-millennium Northport and Vice President Sinclair, these airports seem to have a weird love obsession with these long, skinny, overly long corridors. Though on Earth I'd be sighing at annoyance at having to commute through one, I was practically jumping for joy at seeing something that wasn't a 100-turn corridor here at the Academy. Upon trekking the good 500 feet or so of corridor, I was met with a large pair of double doors. Though instead of wood or oak, these were constructed of something hefty. Steel or some other material, dressed up with intricate craftsmanship that I could only imagine would have taken years to make, given how many murals lined practically each and every square inch of these 20-foot tall doors. I barely had enough time to study them before I committed them to the suit's virtual memory banks. As the pair of large doors opened, revealing what I could only describe as a veritable playground for the likes of the weapons-obsessed Thalmin. The word workshop was an insult to this room. A room that seemed to be an open-planned, cathedral-like expanse of granite and steel. Archways constructed of what looked to be glowing metal, curved around the open expanse, crisscrossing and interlacing like one of those old Victorian-era factories, with questionable health and safety practices. The roof to this place added a layer of opulence to an otherwise rather utilitarian-looking space, with furnaces and forges going off on their own, lining all of the walls and bathing the room in a sweltering heat. Indeed, the room didn't need any lighting fixtures at all. It was the forges alone that provided the warm orange and red glow that bathed the entire space, and there were enough of them that not a single corner of the room was left in the dark, even this late into the night. However, none of these things were truly the most impressive aspect of this place, as that title was instead comfortably held by the man who stood in the middle of it all, dominating the entire space. Throughout my conversations with Thalmin, despite us getting into the specifics of the armorer's temperament, we more or less left the details as to his actual physical characteristics out of our discussions. I'd assumed the man would be yet another elf, or perhaps another petting zoo person, or perhaps even a giant, or even some sort of a dragon-derived being. Maybe even a dwarf, now that I thought about it. However, what awaited me wasn't any of those options, but instead someone that gave me pause, as if I bumped into a spitting mirror image of myself. If I were to get a magical glow-up, that is. Because the person that stood there in the middle of this cavernous room was a being clad in armor. An armor that was intricately designed, detailed, and adorned with motif after motif. From gold to copper, and gems of emerald and sapphire, the man looked as if he just ran through several raids to get the highest tier of armor possible from every single MMO in existence. Though it was clear his armor wasn't just for show either, as several chips, scrapes, and even dents on it were clearly visible. Why he hadn't yet repaired that was beyond me. The next thing I immediately took note of as I took those first tentative steps into the workshop was a massive uptick in mana radiation. Alert! Localized surge of mana radiation detected, 700% above background radiation levels. And the source of all of this localized mana? Aside from the forges that were logged at around 700% above the background radiation levels, was the man himself.
"Ah, I'm here at last! I've been waiting all day for you!"
The man bellowed out, as if his voice had emerged from somewhere deep within the suit, and not from the helmet itself.
"You've caused quite a stir for the folks at the top. Might I say it's been quite an exciting day awaiting your arrival. So, shall you begin, or shall I?"
"Considering I'm the party being inspected, I'd be alright with starting us off, Professor," I offered.
That voice," the man blurted out, as quickly as he'd heard me speak. My sincerest apologies for that little bout of social faux pas, my fair lady. Or is it my fair knight? They said it was cadet. I assume that's a military title. Knight it is, then. Unless you have any personal reservations on what title I should use to properly address you by.
Just cadet, or Emma is fine, Professor, I offered. My composure not once faltering, even as the man's eccentricities began surging to the surface.
Oh, stars above! I apologize if this is too intrusive of a question, but by the gods I must know. Word amongst the student body is that you are a recluse of some sort, or perhaps even a golem of some other foul creature. But surely my hearing does not deceive me. I must ask, are you another one of my kind?
From what I assumed to be a large burly man underneath that bulky suit, began quite literally jumping for joy. Your kind, Professor? I shot back simply.
Ah, but yes, of course,
he began, as he crashed back with a loud clash of metal against metal. It sounded off, more akin to the ringing of a hollow bell than that of an occupied armor.
I do apologize for the overstepping of bounds and the presumptuous nature of my excitement. Yes, my kind. Our kind? The spellbound. Surely I am not mistaken, but the voice I am hearing from within your own set of armor is clearly not generated via conventional? No. Organic. Yes, organic means. Nor is it enhanced with a simple spell of voice amplification. Your voice, as I hear it, is generated via a means not unlike my own. Not through a series of fleshy cores, nor the inhaling and exhaling of stagnant air, but via other means, which can only mean...
Professor, I apologize if I'm interrupting here, but I can assure you I am not a spellbound or anything of the sort. Wait, is this really the first time I'm revealing myself as anything but an Earthrealmer? I'm human, Professor. An Earthrealmer, as people here seem so predisposed to say.
Ah, so, flesh and blood?
The man uttered, with a wide-angled tilt of his head, and a clear tinge of disappointment colouring his voice. Yes, Professor, I'm just flesh and blood underneath this suit.
Darn!
The suited man snapped back, both for his voice and more literally, as he snapped his gloved fingers with a loud metallic clang.
But your aura, or lack thereof, and the lack of any life force, it's...
I interrupted the man before he could finish that thought. Here we go again. It's a long story, Professor.